Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. For this video, we're going to look back into the Jingunden's teachings and into the crossroads between the deities and the legends and the battle and warfare tactics. Now, the reason we're doing this is because, well, not only because of the teachings in the Jingunden do this, but I want you to remember that in the Jingunden, these following points are assumed, right? These following points are true from the viewpoint of the Jingunden. And that is that warfare is something that comes from the gods and the Asheras, right? Human beings learned about warfare from the gods and the Asheras, right? And so in one version of it, it's human beings learned about warfare from the gods and the Asheras, and then in a slightly different version, sort of like a branch version, it's that warfare is really something for the Asheras, and the gods beat the Asheras with warfare, but that warfare is more of an Ashera thing. So therefore, it comes from the gods and the Asheras, but really it's more like it comes from the Asheras. But in the end, it's what's clear to say is that warfare comes from the gods and the Asheras. 3. Warfare is usually a cause for suffering, but it can be a skillful means in certain situations. This is like the video in the Kusunoki Power of the Tao video, where we're talking about how lenient government and warfare are believed to be the same thing. They're an extension of each other. 4. Warfare is an extension of the worldly divinity or of the samsaric realm. Okay, so this part, when we say that warfare comes from the gods or the Asheras, or that it's divine warfare, it's within the context of samsara. It's not from like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's not enlightened, so it's worldly divinities or samsaric divinities. 5. Warfare is supposed to eventually lead away from worldly affairs into higher principles. And the reason for that is because, number 6, warfare is part of the process of government and spirituality. So again, if you've already listened to the Kusunoki Power of the Tao video, it also explained it in there as well. So I won't go into it too far in this video, but the idea is that government and warfare are part of this, they're the same thing, they're part of the same spectrum, and it's part of an individual's journey to a higher state of being, to sort of master government and master warfare, and then go beyond government and go beyond warfare. Similar to the way sort of that a Taoist sage is supposed to master, combat skills and vital energy skills and governing skills, and then eventually go beyond that and retire to a mountaintop type thing. So the idea is that government and warfare, whether it's Buddhist, Taoist, Jingunden, whichever, the idea is that you master these things and then you ultimately go beyond them. So again, if you remember from the Jingunden, you have the sun, the moon, and the dipper, right? So the student must encompass the sun, the moon, and the dipper. They're not supposed to just pick and choose what they want. They're supposed to go dipper, sun, moon, and dipper. Start with the dipper, work through the dipper, get to the moon, work through the moon, get to the sun, work through the sun, right? This encompasses an entire spectrum, starting with military skills and then going over, leading into esoteric principles. So as you can see on the screen, kind of have a diagram here, a crude one of, on the left it sort of starts with military skills, and then that becomes, skills of geography and weather and leadership. So we've gone the dipper, and now we're getting into the moon, and then as you turn it, the line starts to turn purple. Now we're in the moon, and we're mastering the moon, leadership, government, the beginnings of religion, and then it's becoming blue, because now we're getting into the sun, where we're sort of mastering religion and esoteric aspects, right? So, and it's all one spectrum, right? Because when you put blue and red together, you get purple, right? So you can see the red is purple is becoming blue, right? That's what I'm trying to convey here, is that individually they are different arts, but they are not supposed to exist individually. They exist on a spectrum, and the student grows within this spectrum. So these things are not disconnected from each other. They have their proper place in the spectrum. Does that make sense? It's not that there's a bunch of individual things that are separate from each other, but they've been organized from, start to finish. They are all connected to each other. It's just that these things are more like this and these things are more like this. It's the same light spectrum. It's just the different parts of the spectrum. Hopefully that makes sense. So anyway, for this reason, within the Jingunden, there is no separation of church and state, so to speak, right? That is, there's not a division between religion and military skills or government process. Within the Jingunden, they are all interrelated. So as we discuss the Jingunden, and Kusunoki-ryu is included in this discussion as well, especially if you, the viewer, have already watched the Kusunoki Power of the Tao, then a lot of this will sound very familiar. So as we discuss this more and more, you'll see how this spectrum runs through all aspects, right? So there's not a division between what some people believe are real parts, like military techniques, and what people think are myths, such as the religious parts, right? Because I know a lot of Western students want to disregard the spiritual and just take the physical. But in this case, then you should just stop your interest in the Jingunden and stop your interest in Kusunoki. Okay? It's okay for you to unsubscribe from my channel. It's fine. You would be insulting the Jingunden and wasting your time to try and quote unquote only take the parts you think are real, because the entire system exists as a cohesive continuum, and breaking it apart is just going to create failure on so many levels. It's not meant to be broken into parts. You're not meant to cherry pick the things that you think are good. It's the entire system or nothing. So having said that, we'll move on, and for this video we're going to look at the origin stories. So in a previous video we discussed deities of the Jingunden, right? And the deities of the Jingunden is also the origin stories of the Jingunden. And we're going to look at briefly, for this video, we're just going to sort of briefly overview their relationship to fortifications. Okay, so the intersection between the origin stories, the stories of the gods, and fortifications. First, we're going to look at Amaterasu Okami's warfare form, her Jingunden form, and then we're also going to look at Susano's exploits, right? So as we discussed in a previous video, we talked about the Amaterasu Okami and Susano, etc., etc. But now let's look at that again in more detail. And when we do that, we're also going to examine Amaterasu Okami's divine fortress and Susano's 8-layered fortress. So that's what we'll be looking at for this video. Before we look at the sun goddess's fortress, I do want to remind you of her Jingunden form. This is important because most people only think of the sun goddess when she was depressed and hiding in a cave. This does a great injustice to her. She was only mild and meek because she was sad and depressed. So this image of this very meek female sort of just hiding in the cave, that is unique only to that hiding in the cave. She was depressed. She was sad. That's why she was so subdued. Her normal form is far more powerful and regal. And then beyond her normal form, she has her Jingunden form, or the going to war form. It's very powerful. So when we talk about Amaterasu Okami in the Jingunden, we are referring to her going to war form. Okay? And so if you want to visualize it, visualize it as she has her pants pulled up on the side with her hair pulled up, right? Her hair's put up, her pants are tied up. She has her divine bow and her divine arrows and quiver. She has lots of necklaces and bracelets, all made of Magatama beads. She has a sword and knives on her belt. It's the image of a female warrior that is ready to seriously kick some ass. That's the image of Amaterasu. So when we talk about Amaterasu in Jingunden, that is the Amaterasu we're talking about. So if you look at your screen on the left, this is a picture of one of Amaterasu's sons. This is her oldest son. This is actually the son whose descendants become the emperors of Japan. All right. He's one of the deities born when Susano crushed Amaterasu's beads in his mouth. If you have been watching these videos and the deities of the Jingunden, you'll be familiar with the story. This story, the when he crushed the beads in his mouth and she crushed the sword in her mouth, this is a very important story because from this ritual comes a lot of the Jingunden deities. So, for example, the male. So when Susano crushed the beads in his mouth, he gave rise to 5 male deities. And then when she crushed the sword in her mouth, it gave rise to the 3 female deities. The male deities became her offspring, and the female deities became Susano's offspring. And those 3 female deities are called the 3 goddesses of the Jingunden. Okay, so this deity on the page here, that is the oldest son of Amaterasu, from which the emperors come from. Now, do you see the way he's dressed? This is ultimately, we have this slide because I want you to remember the deities that were born from the crushing of the jewels and the crushing of the sword, because those are Jingunden deities. But beyond that, I want you to see the way he's dressed. That is the Amaterasu's war form. Okay, hair is pulled back. You see the necklaces and the arm bracelets, all of this with the Magatama beads. You see the sword, you see the bow, the legs are pulled up and tied. So when we think of Amaterasu in the Jingunden, she's dressed like this. Now let's talk about Amaterasu Okami's divine fortress. Now we're not going to go over it too much, but here are the basics. So this is the divine fortress in the heavens that Amaterasu resides in. And when Susano was coming to visit her, okay, and this was right before the bead and sword crushing ceremony, she was prepared for war. She said, "Oh, Susano's coming. We're going to fight." So then she prepared for war and awaited him in her fortress. And then when he showed up, he said, "I'm not here to fight." And she said, "I don't believe you." And then he said, "Let me prove it to you." And then they do the crushing ceremony where the 5 male and 3 female deities were born. So this fortress is described in various levels of detail in different Jingunden documents. Some are very, very short, and then some are long, right? So some of the longest descriptions involve it having 9 sections, spinning, being capable of deflecting all projectile attacks, and that it looks like a bright, shiny, metallic surface. So, yes, I admit, it does sound a little bit like some ancient alien spaceship. It's metallic, it spins in the sky. Okay, it does sound a little bit like ancient aliens. But aside from that, coincidence. That's the divine fortress. Now, but the thing with the divine fortress is it's mentioned, but it doesn't factor into much further strategy. It's given more as inspiration to Jingunden students than for future techniques. The fortress is supposed to be so awesome, so divine. I mean, again, it's metal, it's in the sky, it's spinning. Right? We can't do that. Samurai, 4, 5, 6, 700 years ago, etc. They can't reproduce that, right? So it's more of an inspirational design than anything that's meant to be copied. But it is taught as in the Jingunden. So it's sort of like the origin of the fortress, like it's the divine fortress that we all aspire to. It is kind of how it's presented. So now let's move on to Susano's fortress. Now this fortress actually is taught in more detail because this becomes the actual sort of basis for actual techniques, actual fortresses that can be built. So after Susano leaves the heavens, he's supposed to report to the land of roots, right? To the underworld, to Nenokuni. But he refuses. He doesn't want to go there yet. So he initially detours to the Korean peninsula. But he doesn't like the Korean peninsula, and he misses Japan. So then he returns to Japan, and he returns to Japan via, like he arrives in Japan in Izumo. So leaves heavens, goes to Korea, doesn't want to stay in Korea, wants to go back to Japan, goes back to Japan, takes up residence in Izumo. And this is ultimately why Izumo becomes the sacred spot, because this is where Susano conducts his war against the Orochi and where his descendant Okuninushi is born and rules. And if you remember, Okuninushi is one of the main Jingunden deities, right? So the Izumo area is considered very sacred, like old school, very sacred, land of mist, sacred kind of level, high level of spiritual importance here, not just in Shinto, not just in Jingunden, but in Shinto in general. So the viewers need to understand that Izumo is considered like the ancient sacred site in Japan, not just for Jingunden, but for Shinto in general. So Susano arrives in Izumo, and as many of the viewers are familiar with, this is where he hears about the Orochi and the fact that it's killing the daughters of the two local deities, and so he decides to save the daughter. So what you see on your screen is the 8-layered fort, or the 8 walled fort, 8-layered fenced fort, different ways of sort of translating the name. But it's a defensive structure which is 8 layers deep, and he places the daughter in the middle of the structure. So there's a tree and a pond in the middle. So there in the story there's a pond and a tree. It's actually where Susano and her are going to live. And so what it is it's the residence, so the residence with a tree and a pond, and then this fortress is built around the residence, this 8-layered fortress. And there's actually a shrine located there today. Like at the site where this took place, there's a shrine there. So the general principle behind this is 8 layers to protect his wife. All right. So, or she's not his wife yet, but will be his wife. Each opening, so each one of these layers, they have the openings, but the openings are offset so that it prevents a direct flow of movement. And this is the same principle if you watched the castle videos. There's 2 of them, 2 videos about castles. If you watched those videos, I discussed something called the Manji Defense. And basically every castle structure is supposed to be based on the Manji Defense. This is the same thing. So the 8 fence fortress is the Manji Defense. And it is considered to be a divine layout because Susano it's Susano, he's one of the deities, right? So, and this is, maybe some of the viewers can understand the impact of that statement, that this is Susano's defensive teaching. So for those of you that understand that, that's big. And for those of you that don't, basically you have to think like Susano is a major religious figure, and this is the teaching of his method of defending, and it is found within almost all the esoteric castle building instructions. You have this same principles, and in the Jingunden it's known as Susano's 8 fences, but it's also known as the Manji Defense. So hopefully the impact of that, hopefully that makes sense to you. This ultimately, and also in a previous video we discussed Umadashi, or the idea of every entrance in and out of the castle has some kind of barricade in the middle of the opening to prevent you going straight in and out. You have to go around a barricade to go in and out, right? So this is also that principle of Umadashi is born from this. So as you can see on the screen, every move requires another 90-degree turn. There's no chance to pick up a relentless momentum and just push right in. This is the meaning of the Manji Defense, which is the same as 8-layer defense. which is the same function or the reason, the idea behind the Umadashi, right? Watch the previous videos on castle structures. If you haven't watched them, then I go into a lot of detail on how castles are set up. But it all starts here with the Manji Defense, aka the 8-layer defense. So as you see on the screen in pink, there is no method, right? You can't just rush right in. Everywhere there's a star, that's literally a something blocking you, so it's impossible to rush right in. In the red arrow, you see you can't just come in. You have to then take a 90-degree turn, and then you got to take another 90-degree turn. And then the blue arrow is like you can take a 90-degree turn that way, or the green arrow, you can take a 90-degree turn that way, down. And then in the red, you can sort of move around the structure like that. And if you know exactly where you're going, you may be able to sort of move in and out, move in and out, move in and out, and get to the center rather quickly. But if you're not familiar with the layout, like in the orange line, you might end up taking a bunch of turns that actually take you back out of the castle, right? Because nothing's a straight path, everything's twist and turn. And then in the middle, you can see the image of the Manji, right? And that Manji can go that way or it can spiral the other way. But the idea is, every straight line leads to a 90-degree turn. And the entire structure, every layer of the structure rotates a little bit to one side. Like you can either go clockwise or counterclockwise, but every layer rotates a little bit. Every layer rotates. So there is no straight shots within this fortification. Now I want to address something here because I know that there are some versions of the story that say Susano turned the girl into a comb. Some versions specifically say an 8-toothed comb, and then he hid her in his hair. But that's not the actual story. The actual story is that he hid the girl in the 8 fence, in the 8 layered, the 8 fences, the fortress of 8 fences, or the 8 layers fortress. And more so, 8-tooth comb is been within sort of commentary, or within sort of commentary, I guess you could say. It's been described as a colorful way of referring to him hiding her in the 8 layers. So when they say that Susano turned her into an 8-tooth comb, some have said that 8-tooth comb is just colorful language of saying that he hid her in the 8-layered fortress. The 8-tooth comb is actually the 8-layered fortress. So the location of the fortress is still there in Izumo. Okay, the fortress is not there, but the location is there. And there's a shrine that stands at the location, right? It's in Shimane Prefecture, okay? And the shrine is dedicated to Susano and his wife, who we're talking about, Kushinada Hime, the daughter that he saved, his wife, and then Okuninushi. And as I mentioned also earlier, the fortress is not just a fortress to hide her in, but it's actually where Susano lived. It was his home, right? So it was used to hide her during the war with the Orochi, but beyond that, it's just the fortress that he lives in. Until eventually he does give in to his divine orders. Because remember, from the very beginning, he was supposed to leave heaven and report to the land of roots. And so eventually he sort of gives in to that divine order, and he leaves Izumo to then go rule over Nenokuni, the land of roots, aka to rule over the underworld. So we're done talking about that for now, and what I want to do to close out the video is present you with 2 slides that will sort of give you some idea of some more Jingunden teachings and then things for future videos. So for example, on the right of the screen, you'll see one diagram, and you'll see pure and impure. And so this is the model of the world. So the world is conceived of as being a sphere in space, which, it's like a planet, okay? A sphere in space. And there's a pure part of the sphere, and then there's an impure part, okay? And so the next picture is describing that further. So the sphere of heaven, the sky, that layer of the sphere is the pure part of the sphere. However, the impure part of the sphere is the sphere of the ocean. and it's on the ocean, or in the ocean, on the ocean. It's within that sphere that the world resides, that land exists, that the islands of Japan and all other lands. So the model of the world from the Jingunden is surprisingly accurate to real life, like to actuality. We're in a spherical planet in space. The outer layer of the planet is a whole bunch of sky, and then we have water and earth on an inner layer. But within the belief system, the sky portion of our planet is pure. The sky clouds, that portion is pure, and then the water and the land is considered impure. The idea behind it is basically that the more solid something takes form, then the less pure it is. That's sort of the idea behind it. Then on the bottom right, we have a diagram, which we're not going to go into this video. I'm just showing it to you, but we'll go into that into a future video, because once you get these initial sort of the impure, the sphere of the world, then it gets into much more complex diagrams after that. And then also in a future video, we're going to look at battle formations. So for example, in this video, we looked at fortifications. But next video, we're going to look at battle formations, the actual movement of troops. And one of them that we're going to look at specifically is called the Dragon and the Thunder, or the Dragon and its Thunder. It's a basic formation, but then once you understand the basic formation, then you can multiply that into a larger force. And so we'll also look at that into a future video. But for now, this video is finished. So thank you.